back to the Washington Outsider Report on the Coalition Radio. For those newly joining the program, my name is Irina Zuckerman, and I'm the editor-in-chief of the Washington Outsider. With us today, we have Noel Hadjimichael. He heads the Defense and Security Circle at the National Liberal Club in London. Most recently, he brought a delegation which included some of the participants to Riga for the NATO Stratcom Center conference called the Riga Dialogue. We'll be talking about some of that today. Thank you so much for joining us. Before we get into the heart of the discussion, could you tell us a little bit about yourself? What exactly is this program that you're running, and how did you come about developing it?
Well, thank you very much, Irina, and it's an absolute pleasure being with you to have a discussion about important things at an important time in history. I'm based in London. I am both a British citizen and an Australian citizen. I work in the area of politics, geopolitics, narrative, warfare, defense and security. And I have founded and lead an organization, basically a loose network of more than 900 people around the world, many hundred in the United Kingdom and close to 500 across allies of the United Kingdom, America, Canada, all of Europe, Australia, India, Israel, Japan, very much people who have a sense of understanding that we are living in challenging and very demanding times. The physical location where we meet in London is in a grand old building in the heart of Whitehall, 300 yards, 300 metres from the Ministry of Defence, Britain's Pentagon, which is in the heart of London, 500 metres or less than half a mile from the Houses of Parliament, where, of course, everyone knows Big Ben, the Elizabeth Tower, and also number 10, 10 Downing Street, where the Prime Minister lives. So it's in the heart of London. It's a group of people brought together in the national interest. It might be liberal, and your American audience may think, well, that's one side of the political fence. But the group is comprised of people who are overwhelmingly mainstream people. We are from the center primarily, some people the center right, some people the center left in terms of politics. Many of us have been or are still civil servants, police officers, military people, people in industry and people in the arts. Everyone interested in our sort of values, pluralism, the rule of law, a responsible and reasonable version of capitalism, and interested in the ideas that are today and the immediate future. So we don't look back, regardless of how much history you might find in the centre of London. We are looking to today's problems, tomorrow's problems, next week, next month, and next year. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of an idea.
So how does this network operate? Meaning, how do people meet each other, stay in touch, given that there are many of them live across the world and don't necessarily go to London all that frequently?
That's a very good question. What we find is that people make connections with each other. We are relaunching our website soon so that people will be able to engage within their own country, as well as also engage with people who have similar interests. Because more than half of the people in the network are aged well under the age of 40. Many of them are in their 20s, in their 30s, young first, second, third job individuals, people who are just out of graduate school, people who have spent some time traveling and are now working maybe in politics, maybe for government, maybe for industry or for charities. They're very tech savvy. They're very much connected to other communities. It's not in any way a bureaucratic process. I like to think that we bring people together who are intrinsically ideas orientated and intrinsically values driven.
So here's my question for you. There's been networks of people operating in various areas since the beginning of time. What exactly inspired your movement as opposed to many other organizations who are doing defense and security and technology and so forth? And how did you decide um, exactly to connect this rising generation of professionals in these areas? Um, how do you define the mission of this movement? What do you want to see happen aside from building great relationships, which of course is always great?
Well, it is true that we did give thought. It was interesting that I spent 5 years in London before the pandemic, living in London with my wife. We resettled from Australia, full of sunshine and good beaches and good wages, to a different life in London, much more cultured, much more historic, very related to Europe, but of course, a different sort of life. And I found myself attending the traditional think tanks, the traditional institutions. And I noticed something which maybe if I'd lived in Canada or Australia, or maybe even some of the smaller European countries, I may not have noticed. It's so easy in a major place like the Royal United Services Institute, RUSI, which is easily seen as a world standard from the 1830s defence and security think tank, based in London, but very much connected with the Ministry of Defence, with the Armed Forces, or Chatham House, that's given us the term Chatham House rules. Chatham House, the International Strategic Studies Organisation, that also has a close relationship with Britain's version of, a State Department, the Foreign Office. So these institutionalized groups, plus ideological think tanks from the left of politics to the right of politics, where people are coming together in the daytime, in work hours, and very much within a silo, within a tribe, within an echo chamber. And by the luck and the opportunity of the early version of the pandemic, when we started settling down in that first few months, when everyone started just living at home in many parts of the world, where there was the lockdown experience, I felt there was an opportunity to bring people together who are outside the silos, so that the 22-year-old young policy officer from, say, a cabinet office or from executive government could meet the 52-year-old brigadier general. These two women might be in different worlds, and yet they have perspectives about a policy, about an area of expertise, about maybe an issue. They're looking at it with different eyes, from different generations, from different professional traditions, but they need to know each other. The best thing was also, one of the driving influences was to bring everyone on the team together so that there was less ideology, less my partisan political perspective, less my institution, my corporation, my transnational charity perspective, where people did a lot of listening, they did a lot of understanding of others' perspectives, and there's a fantastic US term which sounds very dated, sounds very much pre the 2010s, pre this polarized era of politics, but it's that across the aisle, very much that what used to be in the Cold War when Republicans and Democrats, often in the US context, listened to each other, worked together, and found common cause. It's often been said that the Defence and Security Circle is the Switzerland of Whitehall, where we are the meeting place where a representative from another government, a representative of industry, somebody involved in the arts, somebody involved in politics can come together and don't feel constrained by their day job. They're not there because the office has sent them or their boss has sent them. They're often there because of intellectual interest. We have robust, fearless conversations. Only this past week, we've had conversations, no holds bar, to use that term, about Britain's nuclear policy, nuclear weapons, nuclear energy, our nuclear submarine fleet, and our nuclear engineering. We've also had a fascinating 2-hour symposium looking at Britain and looking at Israel, two very different countries, but countries both dealing with toxic narratives driven by hostile states. There is no doubt that both countries have masterful strategic communication skill sets, but it was looking at where there were differences, where there were similarities, and also what was the practice. Where was the stratcom, where was the narrative busting, narrative making skill set of today? Where is the state of play and best practice? And also in this past week, we've dealt with the whole concept of secure communications. What happens when the internet, the Wi-Fi network, undersea cables are cut, power stations are sabotaged, how fragile we are. And one of the strengths of, and I wouldn't call it a movement, I would call it more of a civil society champion. We are in many ways the agora, the meeting place of civil society, based in London, but soon, in the next few weeks, the next few months, having groups form organically in other capital cities, in other major cities, so that maybe Berlin, maybe Warsaw, maybe Canberra in Australia, maybe Ottawa in Canada, where people will similarly look at their own national interest from a new, maybe combination of practical, passionate, and patriotic perspectives. So in some ways, we may be the antidote to tunnel vision, to tribalism, and to partisan politics.
I find that very, very exciting because here in the US, of course, the trend is exactly in the opposite direction. I've gone to salons which very much were arranged by very high level, very intellectual people. They were dedicated to exactly that pursuit of free thinking, free speaking environment, and it was only a matter of time before they deteriorated into tribal toxic discourse, the sort that they were designed to avoid in the first place. So I hope this design of focus on particular industries and bringing diverse people with diverse mindsets in a particular way will work out much better than that.
If I could, I think there's a little bit of science and a little bit of good luck and good design. What we found was that we started the process with a smaller number of people, but we had, and I'm going to use the D word, which has been punished recently in the political debate. And when I use the word diversity, I don't use it in a political, woke, or partisan way. But we found that when, say, 3 or 4 or 5 out of every 10 participants are women, and when we find that the age mix is tilted towards people who are 20, 25, 30, 35, maybe up to 40, and I still call 40-year-olds reasonably young. They're very contemporary. When you get that mix, you often find the aggression, the testosterone, and the dramatic polarization to be much harder to sustain. I have people within my network that hold passionately, diametrically opposed positions on key points. And yet, because we ask people, we tell people, we are firm with people that the mission of the exercise is the national interest. It may be because I'm an ex-military person, maybe it's because I've worked with people from all the political traditions in the past. I've seen how people pull together in a crisis in the same way as when you have the forest fires in California or a plane disaster in the Midwest or a hurricane in Florida. Many people, people of faith, people of fearless community spirit, people who are in positions of responsibility because of their jobs, be it the law, the National Guard, the Red Cross, people pulling together, working together in a sense no dissimilar to the great achievement of what happened in the 1940s, when there is no doubt after America's Pearl Harbor, for 4 years, Americans came together with all of the challenges and all of the divisions and all of the potential barriers. So many millions of Americans learnt more about each other, learnt to work together, to train together, to fight together, and regrettably, in war, in the jungles of the Pacific, on the seas, in the air, and on the battlefields of Europe and North Africa, Americans learned to share the burden together. And that was maybe my parents' generation, what many in the US call the greatest generation. They learned that unity, teamwork, and being humble and putting your country and the group ahead of personal, private, financial, or ideological benefit is in itself incredibly inspiring and you know, in some ways shapes the rest of your life.
Is it about this younger generation that you're cultivating and fostering that makes it different from its predecessors. After all, there's all these stereotypes about the young people with their heads stuck in TikTok and who don't have any social skills and who don't know anything. But on the other hand, you seem to have a great deal of optimism that they could actually fare better in discussions, in debates than their parents' generation, for instance.
Well, I'm absolutely open-minded about my barriers, my hang-ups. I'm the very last version of the boomers. I just qualify as a boomer. Um, I also had the benefit of the greatest generation as parents, wartime people who shouldered the burden of winning a war against naked, aggressive nationalism, against fascism, against race hate, against the horrors of the Holocaust. So, in some ways, I see the under 35s in particular incredibly technology savvy, driven by their own set of values, driven by their own set of principles. And some of them are conservative, some of them are liberal, to use the American language. But they're looking for authentic. They're looking for a real conversation. And maybe what others, maybe 40-year-olds, 50-year-olds, even 60-year-olds, have failed to do is give this younger generation authentic conversation, authentic dialogue. Let's be open about issues. Let's not be frightened to talk about issues that are social, political, geopolitical. Let's open up and recognize that young people are in some ways not that dissimilar to their grandparents and their great-grandparents, who were only just 16-year-olds, 18-year-olds, 20-year-olds. The men who landed on D-Day were overwhelmingly high school educated, young men, fit, but the old guy in the company was a 28-year-old school teacher or lawyer or National Guardsman who just happened to be a farmer or an accountant. The so many were just boys. The women who worked in the war factories, who took on the jobs, so many of them were young women, first opportunity out of their home environment, out of community environment, and learning skills, creating those flying fortresses, creating those ships, creating the industrial might that set America up for decades of global economic and political dominance. So maybe my optimism is based on a reading of history, seeing younger people connecting with older people, but in the right environment where people are doing a lot of listening, younger people are being considered, but if they say something and others disagree, they're being tested, they're being challenged, and there is a maturity. And I think that dialogue is part of the reason why what we've done in London for 5 years has been successful. I think it will work in communities around the world where there is the fundamental underpinning of pluralism, freedom, dialogue, and also a values-based society. We've seen young people who only 10 years ago were going to rock concerts in Central Europe, taking all of the substances and following the lifestyle of a very fast and loose environment. And yet you look at them now and they are 26-year-olds, 24-year-olds, 27-year-olds fighting in trenches in Ukraine. We've seen young people take a more moral position on issues, especially north-south imbalance, global poverty. We've seen young people, show that they do value conversation. So maybe it is this turning of the circle. And if we can get authenticity right, if we can get that environment of what I call robust respect, it's not a safe space, what we do. It's a place of dignity, but of demanding discourse. Nobody gets a note from their mum. Nobody gets to step out of the room. If you come to these events, you listen, you learn, you engage, and you may make new friendships, new connections that will help shape your more nuanced and your more advanced understanding of the world.
Balance, respect for institutional tradition, this environment of high intellectual intensity, like what you described Lucy and Chatham House provide, with the need for innovation and disruption, especially in the defense and security space. We are seeing that a lot of these traditional institutions, and I'm thinking of the US in particular, but the same could probably be said for UK and many other countries, become ossified and unable to perform basic tasks. Just a few months ago, the GNI Tulsi Gabbard wrote that Iran is not pursuing a nuclear bomb, for instance. Obviously, that turned out to be um, not true at all. How do we balance this traditional um, outlook that these institutions hold with innovation and ability to circumvent things that just don't work anymore?
Well, I think one of the golden rules that I've noticed is that younger people and people fresh to the issues, and let's be honest, Irina, you and I are not the average person. We are the policy geeks. You and I are the 1%, not because we're fabulously wealthy. I'll let your viewers and listeners in on the secret that I know that you and I are not in the 1% financially, but we are in the 1% in terms of engagement and knowledge. But what we need is 5%, 10%, 20% of society to be more engaged. We need college graduates, we need high school graduates, we need new immigrants, we need veterans, retirees, we need the soccer mums, the PTA mums, we need straight, gay, country, city people to look at the issues which are now in front of us. We have a land war in Europe. We have a major conflict in the Middle East on multiple fronts. At one stage, the Israel conflict was said to be on 7 fronts. I've lost count. It keeps changing, of course. We have the significant challenge and trauma of the relationship between the United States and the rest of the NATO partnerships, all the other countries. We have North-South issues. Where is Central and South America? Forget immigration, migration flows, just talk about trade, technology transfer, human rights. what's happening with China. Is it 1 million, 2 million, 3.5 million in re-education camps? One would argue that one person in a re-education camp is one too many. So it's these real world issues that we need a larger slice of our society. I was at a conference only this week at King's College London, one of the centres at the War Studies Department, one of the centres of best practice, of clear thinking in the world. And we were discussing emerging technology, drone technology, AI, quantum engineering, all that high-tech stuff, STEM, science, technology, engineering, and maths driven. But where did the conversation go? Eventually, the professors, the technicians, the engineers, the mathematicians, these are people with an Alan Turing sense of skill, awareness, and knowledge. The conversation drifted towards some of the big challenges we face. How do we tell our society we are in what smells like, looks like, feels like a war-like set of conflicts? How do we tell our societies that we're going to have to say goodbye to the peace dividend that we achieved in the early 1990s from the end of the Cold War, and that times are going to be harder? Taxes are going to rise, quality of life and standard of living may go backwards. How will we share that burden? How will we, in a fair way, bring everyone with us? And that's an enormous challenge. And the technology people were needing politicians, we're needing civil society commentators, media commentators, people like yourself, who kick off debates, comment on debates, to get us to think about where we are at. It's a great challenge. I don't want to wait for robots to be telling me what I should be thinking or doing. The business of our society, and regrettably, the reality, the business of war and conflict, and the business of politics and competition, it's still driven by people. We are still at the front of the bus, driving the bus, but all of a sudden the controls are much more like an F-18 fighter plane.
That is true, and there's certainly a lot to think about. But the biggest thing to think about is there a visible shift in how Western democracies are or should be approaching national security? And can you share any of examples of emerging leadership within your network that are indicating that shift?
Well, I think the shift is happening by a combination of necessity, luck, and desperation. And I'll explain why. The necessity is, and I speak as somebody who is caught up in the political process, but there are many other people on a higher pay grade than myself. But the reality is politicians are not dissimilar to the ice cream salesman at the beach. If the beach is 1 mile long, if there is one ice cream salesman, they will sit the ice cream hut, the little house, the little tent with the ice cream in the middle of the beach to bring everyone together, equal distance from the two edges. If there are two people selling ice cream, amazingly, they will often sit side by side so they can maximize the number of people who will come into contact with them and maybe buy their product versus somebody else. So politicians, commentators, the so-called inverted commas experts, we're often responding to real life commentary. An aircraft comes down in India. Missiles rain on Israel from Iran. There is a pollution incident in the Gulf of Mexico, otherwise known as the Gulf of America to some people. The reality is that events are driving the necessity for politicians and leaders of industry, leaders of civil society, leaders of government, to begin a process of being much more honest, much more direct with their populations. But we also have the luck. The luck is we do not have an economic boom, a technological boom. There is no easy money. We've used quantitative easing. We've, since the financial crisis of 2006, 2007, 2008, we've printed a lot of money. And we've had elements because of the pandemic where we got people to stay at home. We printed a lot of money, and that had impacts, slightly inflationary. All of that, the luck of where we are, a bad winter, a bad harvest, bad weather conditions, a bad geopolitical deal. Yes or no, does the G7 have a statement? Yes or no, what is the president thinking? Yes or no, what is happening in Beijing and what is happening in Moscow? We are responding to events as they happen in real life. And in some ways, there is also the desperation that technology is racing ahead. AI, machine learning, quantum engineering is going to take away our agency. People are going to be less important. People are going to be secondary to maybe systems. Now, I don't think it's going to turn out to be like Terminator. I don't think it's going to turn out to be like Arnold Schwarzenegger on a motorcycle, on a Harley Davidson. I think it's more likely to be that our devices, our communications, our logistics will become highly automated, and it will take away some of our freedoms, some of our choices. It will give us some comfort, but it'll also add enormous fragility. There is nothing more human than filling a sandbag or putting in a tank trap on a road or handing people a food parcel in a crisis or bringing someone comfort and joy as an individual. The moment systems, computers, robots, and automation takes away the caring and the safety, we have got ourselves into some really difficult waters. So I think that defense and security has popped up. The end of history was maybe somebody's idea 20 years ago or thereabouts. We are back in a new space. It is not the second version of the Cold War. This is a completely different geopolitical environment. We have three strong, big picture men, one in China, one in Russia, one in the United States, that are the great players in this game. We have a Europe we have an Africa, we have a South America, and we have an Asia that's trying to grapple with these titanic, enormous, bit like super tankers on the ocean, and we're all in smaller ships trying to get around them. I just think that we're living in a challenging time where ordinary people need to understand that defense, security, our sovereign national interest, and our respect for law, for human rights, and for human dignity are now much more than ever before at the top of our priorities. Maybe we are in times of great conflict. It is our time to deal with this, just like the young men and women from 1939, 1941 faced the challenges that they didn't ask for, they didn't necessarily contribute to in any personal way. It came to them and they had to respond. And we may need to be as strong, as courageous, as hardworking, and as innovative as they were.
Given the complexity of this environment and these challenges, how do you see mentorship evolving in this field to remain relevant to the younger cohorts who are being shaped by hybrid conflict, cognitive warfare, and this extremely chaotic combination of things that were not on anyone's mindset even a few years ago?
Well, as somebody who picks up the language and struggles with, is it grey zone warfare? Is it a hybrid warfare? Is it non-traditional warfare? It doesn't necessarily matter what labels we use, but we are in a time where hostile states, criminal gangs, transnational organizations, individuals, movements that can be weaponized and mobilized by our adversaries. Some people call them our enemies. I tend to still use the term adversaries. There are countries, there are people, there are ideologies that are just opposed to who we are. We've had 2 decades plus of radical Islamism. We've had more than 2 decades plus of radical left-wing and now growing right-wing populism, verging on the criminal, the anti-democratic, the violent. And yet most people, when push comes to shove, in Western democratic pluralist societies are fundamentally middle of the road people who are just searching for some certainty, for some reassurance, for the sense that their children and their grandchildren will have a better situation than they have. We could have reached a stage in our evolution over the last 150 years of societies where the young under 35s are the first generation that are facing, on the whole, as a general rule, less quality of life, more headache, more drama, more struggle, more burden than their parents or their grandparents. Now, for immigrant societies, for most societies, that would be dramatic. That would be causing enormous social tension because much of the American dream, much of the European social welfare safety net much of the frontier settler society, Canada, Australia mentality was things will get better, standards will rise, incomes will rise, opportunities will give you more horizons, more options. And to tell people that their kids will be poorer, less healthy, more stressed than they are, that's a bitter pill, especially for people who may be already in the bottom or the middle of society, already under stress, and already may be suffering from health, emotional, psychological, or cultural barriers to participation, to advancement in their societies.
This is clearly a lot to overcome, but this is where civic institutions come in. So how can they contribute to bridging generational and cultural gaps, especially within the transatlantic security community, and especially now when there is a challenge in a lack of connection, lack of conversation, and lack of mutual understanding? Sure, diplomats meet and they talk, but there seems to be a complete disconnect between the United States and Europe on a social level, for instance.
Well, we have to revitalize and renew the people-to-people, community-to-community connections. You look at France and Germany, who spent decades at each other's throats. You look at Britain and France, who spent 300 years at war with each other. There is a very old joke which very much plays to the British sense of humour. You have Germany and Britain, 300 years of friendship, populated with 10 years of very serious disagreement because of the two world wars. And you have France, the exact opposite, 10 years of being together and 300 years of being very, very anxious about each other. And whilst the humorists, the comedians, the political jargon can be a little bit harsh, the stereotypes and the narrative do point to something, and it's about people. It's very hard to be challenged if you have lived experience, you have connections through trade, through tourism, through education, and keeping America, Europe, talking to each other, working with each other is so critical, so important. And also values-based, authentic conversation. Being upfront, being prepared to have difficult conversations. Why do some people think we're being hypocritical or lacking in consistency when we treat one country one way and one country the other way? Or where we may be good on one issue, but very bad on another. You know, why are there winners and losers? It's always going to be hard. But one thing I find, open, free, democratic societies have that inbuilt confidence. We will go through the hard conversation. It is because we go back to a tradition of more freedom, more agency, and a sense that those who govern us govern given our consent. There is no question the young men sent to their deaths in the Ukrainian war by Mr. Putin's regime have no agency. there is no question that China is a very top-down society. The volunteers, in inverted commas, from North Korea that we're finding, or the mercenaries from Africa that we're finding fighting in the Donbass for Russia, these are individuals who have had less choice or are driven by circumstances. I don't want Africa to be recolonized by Beijing and Moscow. I don't want America to lose its relationship with Central and South America. The Monroe Principle, the Monroe Doctrine, was very much to keep the headaches of Europe and the rest of the world away from the Western Hemisphere. We want Southeast Asia to be prosperous, generally free, generally democratic and pluralist societies. We want Japan to have the integrity and safety it deserves. We want Taiwan not to be incorporated against its will into a China ruled by the one party and the one ideology. So maybe we are in that 1938 moment where the tectonic plates are shifting, and like being in California when there's a bit of an earthquake, the ground is moving from under your feet and you have to know what to do. And part of the answer is the communication story, the storytelling story, the how we deal with the total information environment that we're faced. We have a 24/7 news cycle. We have, forget the rise of social networking media, we have the domination by social networking media. I've just realized that this week past that I think WhatsApp is going to start sending me ads. How delightful. Another thing on my phone, on my device, giving me free advice where I should spend my money. It would be better to have more money in theory, but maybe I'm not that much of a crass consumerist. The interconnectedness of audiences, where most people under 30 do not read a newspaper, do not listen to the radio other than for music, get their news content from their friends and from social media outlets. And also the relationships, and you mentioned institutions, you mentioned structures, you mentioned traditional pillars of our society. Well, the law, politics, our allies, NATO, the United Nations, things like trade policy, things like old relationships, the special relationship between the United Kingdom and the United States, the AUKUS relationship with Australia thrown in, the interesting emotional relationship between France and America, courtesy of the Statue of Liberty and the Revolutionary War. You know, so much of what we think and how we feel is driven by the technology of communication and the strategic use of communication activities, even for a structure as old and as weathered and as, in theory, bureaucratic, like NATO, for example, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, is that there are multiple, like how many fingers you have on your hand. You've got public diplomacy. You've got public affairs where you inform the public about what you do. You have military public affairs where your audience is the technical audience. You want soldiers, airmen, and sailors in different countries. You want the Dutch sailor to know what the German and British sailor are doing in NATO. You want the Air Force unit from Turkey in the Baltics to know what the mission is. You've got information operations where you've got a coordination of messaging to produce a desired effect. And it will either attack or undermine the will, the skill, and the capability of adversaries. We stand for freedom. You don't. We stand for respect and dignity. You don't. We stand for a better quality of life. You don't. We don't go and invade any of our European neighbours. You do. We don't undermine your democracy. You do. And psychological operations. Everyone's watched the thriller. Everyone's seen the Netflix series. People are, very aware of the spy genre or the thriller genre or the AI science fiction genre, where perception is reality, where attitudes are shaped, where propaganda exists. Well, let's think about it. In the couple of years before Pearl Harbor in 1941, American public opinion shifted from being relatively neutral and keeping out of Europe's war and keeping out of the headaches of what was happening overseas to becoming much, 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 much more orientated towards supporting Britain, supporting their allied cause, standing up for democracies. Did that happen by luck? No. Did that happen naturally and organically? Somewhat. But also, you had Stevenson the Canadian, and you had an army of operatives for Britain and the allied countries who were under occupation, informing, providing advice, helping to shape American public opinion. Maybe we need to admit that we have to start talking with our own populations. We start needing to convince people in Arkansas and in Idaho and in upstate New York and in the south side of Chicago and in the LA foothills and the dry commuter neighborhoods of Arizona. We need to have a conversation with people, not to bamboozle, to conflict them, to sell them a story, but to have storytelling in language they understand. What's facing the country? What's facing the Western world? What's facing our allies? What is the challenge? Where is China? Where is Russia? Where is Tehran? What is happening? Maybe it's time for us to be more fearless, more candid, and more open with the men and women, especially of the younger generation, who will bear much of the responsibility. Old men don't go to war unless things have turned absolutely terrible. It is often young men and women who have to bear the burden of the hard work and the sacrifice.
That brings me to this question. How does your initiative address the challenge of apathy or ideological fragmentation among young elites in Western democracies, and especially given the fact that there is a an additional challenge of deferring historical memories regarding NATO, regarding the Cold War, regarding colonial legacies, on trying to bring some sort of a cohesion among this future generation.
I think what we've found in our experience, and remember, it is
Mhm.
our experience reaching out to a community nearly 1,000 strong, and these are many people working in key strategic roles in the Cabinet Office, in executive government, at a think tank, in the military. People, um, even one of the people caught up in our network at one stage was the speechwriter for the second most senior admiral in the Royal Navy, somebody whose day job probably meant they worked very hard, but they were exposed to incredible ideas and incredible responsibilities in their role. Maybe the lessons we've learned is be fearless, be authentic, be inclusive. Don't be inclusive to tick a box. Don't be inclusive to respond to some, as people would use the term, woke agenda. See merit in everyone who can contribute. Talk about the positives. Look for the glue that binds people together. Look for values that are fundamental to who we are as a society. Build lasting, coordinated dialogue. If people listen to each other, if people sit back and listen to other perspectives, even if they are confronting and they are, on face value, different fundamentally to their own, seeing the merit in the other's argument, seeing the merit in the other's perspective, without giving away and ceding, giving in about your own values. Maybe it's producing a general public awareness and an ongoing dialogue. I don't want American, Australian, British, German, French, Polish, Japanese, or Indian citizens to just think about these issues once every 2 or 3 years when there's an election, once, twice, or 3 times in the year while watching a Netflix documentary or a thriller or a spy movie or some news program on cable television. It has to be what's happening in the world now. How will it affect me? What can I do? What did President Kennedy ask? Not what your country can do, ask what you can do for your country. People like President Reagan, people like President Bush Sr., people like FDR and others, people who took on responsibility but then laid out what was expected of you as a citizen, as a good citizen, as a participant. Maybe we are shortchanging our younger generation by asking less of them. In the COVID, in the pandemic, so many volunteers my age and 10 years younger than me put themselves on the line to help people, to inoculate, vaccinate people, to support health systems, to provide care and attention to isolated persons. Did we ask enough people who were young to be involved? Did we bring people who are economically inactive, people who are on welfare benefits or employment benefits? did we ask them to put back into society? It's no similar to some arguments that in some countries in Europe, there are calls for the reintroduction of national military service. Maybe not for every young person, maybe for a select proportion of young people, but a biggest reasonable number of people so that it's not a burden of the poor, the desperate, or the uneducated. It's getting everyone on the team. Maybe we need to have more people having a gap year, having a year between education and further education or employment, where they give back to society. Maybe we need to ask people to live up to their grandparents and their great-grandparents' example. Who knows? The best thing about what I do is that I'm surrounded by young people who do have values and who are not frightened or scared or anxious or intimidated to showcase those values, even when I don't even necessarily agree with them. There is that mutual respect. Let's sit down. What could go wrong if we listen to each other?
In some of that, when you brought several of such young people and identified others at the Riga dialogue convention, that I also happened to attend this year. So I'm curious to hear what were your key takeaways from this event in general, and especially in the context of NATO's evolving communications doctrine and what that means for this younger generation.
Well, I think some of the good takeaways for the younger generation and for the general public is we know that there's manipulation. We know that there is AI, there are bots, there are disinformation factories happening. We know that there is propaganda and toxic narratives that divide our societies. We can see political interference. We can see elections in countries like Romania and Moldova being challenged. We can see elections in big societies like Britain and Germany and America having what looks like, smells like, feels like foreign intervention, even if it's only of a moderate impact. What I thought was interesting at the NATO Strategic Communications Conference, and it was bringing together 800 experts and people interested, people like yourself and myself, Irina, who find this the lifeblood of democracy or the lifeblood of a defense and security environment. We looked at the changing face, the changing nature of cognitive warfare, of ideas warfare, and having to rethink how do we deter communications? How do we inoculate or vaccine ourselves from the challenges of deep fake technology, of AI-driven narratives, of convenient arguments that divide our societies? And also, we had to have a wake-up call. What's happening with nuclear deterrence? Are we actually seeing more rather than less potential for battlefield nuclear weapons? What's the strength of NATO? Do our societies understand? It's easy if you're in Finland or in Sweden or in the Baltics, Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, or maybe frontline Poland near the Suwałki Gap. It's easy to see and smell Russia's activity. You see, if you're in Minnesota, the Ukrainian war seems a long way away. If you're in Ecuador, what's happening in Taiwan seems a long way away. But for some people, there are frontline states. People sense what's going on. And also, how do we, in our own communications policies and strategies, create conditions where the adversary, the enemy of our country, we can call it a Beijing regime, we can call it a Moscow regime, we can call it a Tehran regime, or North Korea. How do we punish or extract a high cost on them? What will make them give up or lessen their activity? I think also what I found fascinating was how you influence your own population. Give them the information, give them the dialogue, give them the discourse, bring people in on where things stand. Is there some red lines to cross? What is permitted, what isn't? How do we fight fear or concern or anxiety? Our grandparents' generation used to get under chairs and desks during nuclear war exercises, as if that would have made any difference. But what it did do is remind people that there was a nuclear threat. There was a sense of conflict. There was a sense of threat that needed to be addressed professionally. And yes, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
A little bit of dust in my throat. What I think is also interesting is, how is the machine learning going to happen? Pardon me, we'll have to edit out my cough, but pardon me, we have to maybe go into a very big debate. Do we rebrand freedom, the concept of freedom? Can we reclaim its meaning for current, future generations? What is the meaning of freedom? Is it commercial, economic freedom? Is it personal liberty? Is it personal dignity? Is it fear from an oppressive regime? We have to understand what's the bedrock. The Atlantic Charter, signed by Churchill, signed by FDR, the fundamental core document underlying the United Nations, for example, and much of the settled global post-war order, that emanated from values, self-determination, freedom, the four great freedoms: freedom from want, freedom from fear, the freedom to express yourself, the opportunity to find prosperity. These are some of the issues that we dealt with as professionals of strategic communications. Some people say propaganda and narrative making. I would like to think it's all about persuasion. It's all about making people have the time, the opportunity to think and to critically analyze. And it's all about storytelling. Storytelling not just to others, to our neighbours, to our allies, to our neighbouring countries, to our adversaries, but storytelling to ourselves. What stories do we tell about ourselves? Who we are, what we value. We may need to reinvent the storytelling that will reach today's 15-year-old or 25-year-old.
Sense, in your view, are there any ethical boundaries of strategic communication, given that we are living in a time of total information warfare, of alternative facts, quote unquote, of fake news, and of stories that just seem to blend into one another, f- and one story is more fantastic than the next?
Well, I think Churchill said something along the lines, and I'm happy to be corrected, but Churchill did say that a half-truth or a lie runs around the world faster than truth can put on its first boot, let alone its second boot, as truth gets out of bed. So we have to recognize that the negative, the toxic, the unbalanced is by its nature going to have impact, going to have pace, going to have an at speed ability, a velocity, like a bullet that's fired out of a precision rifle. It will hurtle its way across. But what's the antidote to the bullet that's flying over the battlefield? It's wearing the armor. And what is the armor? It is, in simple terms, people say the armor is truth. Well, I actually think it's more complicated than that. Truth plays a role. But what is the armor that we put on? We put on critical thinking. We put on a degree of Western pluralistic democratic society cynicism. We challenge, we test, we probe. We don't accept at face value the very first thing we see. It's a bit like going into a shop and seeing something is for $1 and you think and you say to yourself, that's too good to be true. And then you pick it up and you realize it's cheap, it's nasty, it's probably not going to do the job. Your temptation, it's caught your eye, but you know you shouldn't waste $1 or an extra minute on it. What we need to do in strategic communications terms is to arm with armor, with process, with critical thinking skills, our population. It may mean that politicians, bureaucrats, industry leaders, the people who run our culture, industries, advertising, Hollywood, we're going to have to be a little bit more honest, a bit more direct. We're going to have to bring people with us. Now, that doesn't mean we can't be creative storytellers. Rosie the Riveter was a fantastic story based on storytelling skill, but authenticity. When FDR gave Britain the 50 destroyers to allow us to feed ourselves, the storytelling was, it was for payment of an alliance of bases that were for the future and supported America's national interest. But it was a desperate need. We needed the ships. We had the men. We needed to keep the food, the fuel, and the munitions coming to Britain. It was make or break. So in the end, storytelling has to be driven by truth, authenticity, candor. We are going to have to trust our people. And if it means a different style of politician, a different style of media operator, we're going to have to accept that. We're going to have to own the solution and the process, because no one is coming on a white horse. The cavalry isn't coming to save us, just like in a John Ford movie. We're going to have to save ourselves.
That reminds me of what you just said about an article I saw today in the British blog about the deficit of trust in Britain, although the same can be said from other Western countries, including and especially the United States. These used to be high trust societies. Now they're becoming lower trust societies, increasingly cynical. One of the issues that I heard being discussed at the NATO conference was about how the younger generation is so skeptical about all the AI generated slop online and all the bots that they sense that it's all nonsense and they don't pay a lot of attention. So to some extent that's a good thing, but on the other hand, part of the things that countries like Russia and China trying to do is make everyone so cynical that they and nihilistic that they don't believe anything at all. So given this situation, how can how can the next generation build information resilience and the ability to pass the smell test with these stories and narratives, but also maintain open societies, free discourse, and high trust values that made these societies so great to begin with?
Well, I think you've hit the nail on the head, Irina. It's this razor's edge. We are literally following a very thin, narrow pathway. On one side is disaster, on the other side is disaster. We have to go very carefully. We recognize that authenticity, candor, direct reliability. Maybe politicians have to be honest with people. Maybe bureaucrats have to admit when they make a mistake. Maybe the company that has built the building wrong, built the ship wrong, built the plane wrong, built the road poorly, provided the substandard product. Maybe there is a need now for more general accountability. Younger people have the one fantastic thing going for them. It is they are at the beginning of their lives. Yes, they are cynical. Yes, they're very distrusting of what's on their technology. But also, they have the benefit, in theory, of a long life. They know that they are at the beginning of the journey. Those of us like myself who are, getting towards the end of their journey in terms of, I have some decades as opposed to many decades in front of me. We have to be much more honest. A very close friend of mine passed away in the last week. What was the merit of value of his life? There was his private life, his family life, his life with children, but there was also his public life. His work in the health caring profession, his ability to reach people, to listen to people, to give them comfort when they were in difficult circumstances. Now, he didn't do it to become a wealthy man. He didn't. He didn't do it to become a well-known man. He didn't do it to be applauded on TikTok, Instagram, or any other social program. And he didn't do it even for notoriety or prestige. He did it because it was the right thing to do. It's like those people. It's like Jimmy Stewart, who demanded, insisted, broke his contract with the Hollywood moguls and forced himself to be inducted into the US Air Force, and to then not be just used for propaganda and for newsreels and not be just a trainer, but to go on his more than 20 combat missions in Europe, to fly with the men that he was responsible for and to take on their challenges, their danger, and to then come back from that experience and come back to a normal, if you can call a Hollywood star's life normal, but back to mainstream life. And it's those decisions, those personal decisions, doing what is the right thing. The person who, in another time, in another place, doesn't think of themselves, but thinks of others. Maybe we can reach younger people by promoting their discovery of the better version of themselves, which is laying inside them. You know, it is important to give authentic example to others.
The hour is getting quite late, so I would like to end on the following note with this question. What kind of geopolitical leadership should young professionals aspire to? Technocratic, ideological, moral, or pragmatic? And along the same lines, what advice would you offer a young person entering this field, overwhelmed by the complexity and moral ambiguity of today's strategic environment?
Well, the best advice I've given always, for years and years, not just now, is to always follow your passion. You have got your unique DNA. You know yourself better than anyone else. I am the absolutely worst, most terrible homemaker, housewife, domestic goddess in the world. I fail to do things to the standard that I would like. I'm also involved in the political process. I'm comfortable and content with that. But what I found was my passion, my DNA, who I am, is the world of defense and security, is the world of mentorship. So the person who wants to follow their heart, she wants to follow engineering or nuclear medicine or a general caring job, or the young man who says, I want an outdoor life. I want to be physically fit. I don't want to be in front of a screen all day long or in front of a desk. But what I would say is that whenever you are pursuing your personal passion, which is very much to your benefit and very much self-orientated, and there's nothing wrong with that, think about what you can do for your society, your country, your community. And if it means joining the ROTC in college, it means supporting a not-for-profit charitable organisation. It's considering working in law enforcement, considering working in medical care, or other caring roles. It's juggling what's in it for you versus what's in it for us as a society. If you are 50-50, be drawn to what you believe is morally and ethically the right thing to do. I would love to see the next generation be like their grandparents and grandparents, great-grandparents. I want them to be like the 1930s and 1940s generation. They weathered the economic storm of a Great Depression. They weathered the hard times. They weathered the Dust Bowl. They handled the shock of an attack. They handled the weariness of a war. And they put themselves not first, but they put their country and their community first. That in itself is doing the right thing. And there is great comfort in going on that journey. So let's see how this generation faces these next few months, few years. We have precious time before things get much, much more difficult.
Thank you so much for this insightful discussion, and I think this conversation will only continue in future meetings because there's a lot more to be said on all of these subjects. And as the environment evolves, as your community, your network grows, I think all of these discussions, I think, will help open up a lot more perspectives, a lot more ideas, and hopefully a lot more solutions as well. Thank you for joining us today, and I hope many more people who hear this program are inspired to contact you to join the network once the website becomes available, and of course to check out organizations like the National Liberal Club and to attend events like the Riga Dialogue and have engage in those conversations, ask the tough questions, and think about their own choices and their own priorities and interests.
Thank you, Irina, and thank you for the opportunity of continuing our relationship as people who care about values and who care about the future. Thank you so much.
Thanks for everyone for watching. We'll be back again next week, Tuesday night at 9 p.m. And thanks for everyone who joined us this evening. Have a great rest of your night.